Heart-stopping betrayal collides with big money and family pressures in this incredible journey from a golden past to a future reclaimed. I've known Dory for as long as I can remember. Growing up in our small town, our lives intertwined so naturally that even as children, it felt like our souls were connected in ways I couldn't quite explain. We spent our days chasing the sun, inventing secret codes, and dreaming up wild adventures that made the world seem endless. There was a time when every scraped knee and every burst of laughter was shared, a bond so effortless that it seemed to exist beyond the confines of ordinary friendship. As we edged into our teenage years, something began to shift. That deep, unspoken connection evolved into something more delicate and stirring, an emotion that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I remember our first tentative steps into romance. Awkward smiles exchanged in the hallway, lingering glances that said more than words ever could. We were young and hopeful, convinced that the magic of our bond could defy any obstacle. Yet life has a peculiar way of testing even the strongest of connections. Just when the simplicity of our shared world seemed unbreakable, I was presented with an opportunity to pursue my master's degree, a dream I had nurtured for years. Leaving home meant more than just stepping into a new chapter of my education. It meant stepping away from the very person who had always been my anchor. The decision to part ways romantically was agonizing. On the eve of my departure, we made a promise to hold on to our friendship, even as we stepped into lives that might pull us in different directions. I still recall the tearful smiles and the unspoken fear that our separation might be the end of something precious. Distance, however, has a way of reshaping the contours of the heart. Even thousands of miles away, Dory's presence lingered in every corner of my mind. The letters and sporadic phone calls served as a lifeline, bridging the gap between two worlds that had once been one. In the quiet moments of my studies, I found solace in the memories of her laughter and the warmth of her touch. Yet, every success I achieved felt bittersweet, punctuated by the quiet ache of a love left waiting in the wings. Then, out of the blue, fate intervened. I found myself at a small gathering hosted by a mutual friend, a seemingly ordinary event that quickly turned extraordinary. In the midst of casual chatter and the hum of background music, our eyes met. In that fleeting, charged moment, it was as though the years of separation melted away, leaving us suspended in a time that belonged only to us. The reunion was gentle but profound, a silent acknowledgement that while the world had moved on, some connections are simply too resilient to fade. As we began to reconnect, I couldn't help but wonder if our separation had been merely a test, a detour designed by fate to prepare us for something greater. I soon learned that the time apart had done more than just distance us physically. It had transformed us. The boy who once held Dory's hand in the innocence of youth had grown into a man with ambitions and scars, while Dory, too, had navigated her own trials and triumphs. It became apparent that the reunion wasn't just about rekindling a past romance. It was about acknowledging how much we had both changed, and yet, somehow, remained fundamentally the same. In the delicate space between then and now, layers of old secrets and new realities began to surface. I discovered that our breakup, once attributed solely to my departure for graduate school, was more complex than either of us had ever admitted. There were moments of misunderstanding, unspoken resentments, and even subtle betrayals that had silently chipped away at the foundation of our youthful relationship. It was as if our separation had been orchestrated by fate to force us to confront not only the love we once shared, but also the darker, hidden corners of our hearts. That quiet reunion, filled with the promise of lost time, quickly evolved into a journey of rediscovery, a chance to piece together the fragments of our past and forge a new path forward. I began to see that the love we once took for granted was not a relic of our youth, but a living, breathing entity, shaped by every hardship and every unexpected twist of fate. In the midst of our reconnection, I felt the weight of all those years spent apart, as if every moment had been leading to this singular, breathtaking collision of destiny. Even now, as I reflect on that reunion, I remain in awe of how unpredictable life can be. What started as a simple childhood friendship had weathered the storms of separation and transformation, only to emerge stronger and more nuanced. It was a reminder that love is never straightforward, It is a tapestry woven with threads of joy, sorrow, regret, and redemption. And in that intricate weave, I found the courage to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, our story was destined to continue, no matter how many unexpected twists lay ahead. After 4.5 years abroad in Singapore, returning home felt like stepping into a long-forgotten dream. Singapore had been an electrifying whirlwind. Every day, I was immersed in a culture so vibrant and relentless that I often felt both exhilarated and out of my depth. I'd worked long hours, pushed past my comfort zones, and even discovered hidden parts of myself I never knew existed. Yet, amid all that constant change, my thoughts frequently wandered back to Dory and the familiar comfort of home. When I finally touched down back in my hometown, I was immediately struck by how the world seemed to pause for a moment. The familiar streets, the cozy cafes, and even the lingering scent of rain on pavement all brought a rush of nostalgia. But nothing could compare to the thrill of seeing Dory again. It was as if the universe had conspired to guide me back into her orbit precisely when I needed it most. We started dating once more, and it was surreal, like picking up a conversation we'd paused years ago, only to realize the dialogue had grown richer and more profound with time. Every shared laugh and every silent glance between us reaffirmed that the bond we had formed during childhood wasn't something that could ever be easily forgotten. Our connection felt timeless, yet it was peppered with the complexity of all the experiences we'd each accumulated during our years apart. The moment our families learned about our reunion, I could see the spark of hope in their eyes. They were overjoyed, their hearts seemingly lightened by the news that two souls, long separated by circumstance, had found their way back to one another. Family gatherings, once marked by a subtle undercurrent of tension due to our past breakup, now brimmed with unspoken relief and joy. It wasn't just a reunion between two individuals. It felt like a healing of wounds that had been left to fester over time. Before long, the whirlwind of emotion and mutual rediscovery led us to a decision that, even in our wildest dreams, we hadn't dared to imagine. We got engaged. We set our sights on a wedding in 2025, a date that seemed to promise a future filled with hope and stability. The planning was already in full swing, and every detail, from the color of the invitations to the choice of venue, felt laden with the weight of our shared past and the promise of our future. Yet, even amid the joy and the rapid forward momentum, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of uncertainty. Life had taught me that nothing ever unfolds exactly as planned. Each step forward was both a celebration and a silent acknowledgement that unexpected twists could still lie just around the corner. Despite that undercurrent of apprehension, the overwhelming sense of rightness in reuniting with Dory made every risk seem worth taking. That evening, as dusk settled quietly over our little living room, everything changed. Dory's usually warm eyes held an unfamiliar glimmer, a mixture of vulnerability and determination that I hadn't seen in years. We had spent the day laughing over trivialities and reminiscing about our shared past. But as the night deepened, so did the shadows between us. In a hesitant voice, she broached a subject that hit me like a ton of bricks. "I've been feeling insecure," she confessed softly, her gaze dropping to her trembling hands. "Not just about us, but about myself, about my intimate skills." She paused, as if weighing every word. Then, with a courage that both startled and saddened me, she added, "Maybe, just maybe, we should consider opening up our relationship, temporarily. I think it might help me gain the experience I need to feel more whole." I stared at her in disbelief, my mind struggling to process the idea. For a long, silent moment, the only sound in the room was the rhythmic tick of the clock on the wall. My heart pounded as I tried to find a foothold in a reality that suddenly felt foreign. Opening up our relationship? It wasn't merely a suggestion about exploring new experiences. It was a crack in the foundation we had built over decades. "Dory, what are you saying?" I finally managed, my voice unsteady and edged with shock. I could feel the rising tide of anger and hurt welling inside me. "You mean you want to experiment with other people?" The words tumbled out harsher than I intended, echoing off the walls of our safe haven. She met my gaze, and in that moment, I saw both her desperation and her fear. "I'm not asking for something casual," she replied, her voice strained. Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough, like I can't give you everything you deserve. I thought that maybe by exploring these feelings, I might learn what I need to be better for us." Her explanation did little to calm the storm inside me. I felt betrayed, as if every moment of trust we had built over the years was being unraveled by a single, reckless idea. I couldn't fathom how our love, which had weathered years of separation and the complexities of change, could now be reduced to an experiment. The room, once our sanctuary, suddenly felt oppressive, filled with the weight of unspoken accusations and shattered expectations. "Dory," I said, my voice rising in a mix of anger and disbelief, "this isn't something we can just experiment with. Our relationship isn't a lab for testing out ideas. We built something real together, a bond that shouldn't be compromised by doubts or fleeting insecurities." Every word felt like a plea to salvage what was slipping away. Her eyes shimmered with tears, and for a moment, I saw the pain behind her proposition. A raw, honest admission of feeling inadequate. But even that didn't soften the blow. "If you go through with this," I warned, my tone steeled with resolve, "if you decide to open up our relationship, then it's over between us. I can't accept a future where our love is treated as a trial run for something else." The words hung in the air, bitter and final. In that instant, our past, the shared laughter of our childhood, the passionate days of our youth, the moments of reconnection after years apart, felt like it was teetering on the brink of oblivion. I could see the shock and hurt in her eyes, the same eyes that had once shone with unbreakable trust and devotion. But my own hurt was too raw, my pride too wounded to allow for any negotiation. Our conversation escalated from quiet disbelief to a heated argument. The living room, once a space of comfort and familiarity, became the arena for our clashing emotions. I accused her of undermining everything we had fought so hard to rebuild. In my anger, I failed to see that her suggestion, as misguided as it might seem, was a desperate cry for help, a plea to fill a void she felt deep inside. The more we argued, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about physical exploration. It was about our fears, hers of not being enough and mine of losing the precious bond we had cultivated over decades. I felt trapped between the person I thought I was, the man who vowed to protect our love at all costs, and the man who, deep down, wondered if maybe there was something we both needed to understand about ourselves. In the heat of that stormy night, I drew a line in the sand. "Dory, if you go down this path, even if it's just to find yourself, it's not just a temporary detour. It means you're willing to risk everything we've built. And I won't stand by and watch our relationship crumble into something unrecognizable." The silence that followed was more deafening than any argument. Dory's eyes filled with tears as she sat there, the woman I had loved since childhood now looking like a stranger burdened by her own insecurities. I left that night, stepping out into the cool air, my mind a whirlwind of anger, regret, and a deep-seated fear of losing what we had. In the solitude of my drive home, I replayed the confrontation over and over. I questioned if I had truly understood her feelings or if I was so caught up in my own hurt that I dismissed her struggles outright. The shock of her proposal forced me to confront a painful truth. Maybe our love, which I had always thought was simple and unassailable, was far more complex and fragile than I had ever admitted. Days passed in a blur of silence and introspection. Then, unexpectedly, a handwritten letter arrived from Dory. In it, she poured out her soul in a way that forced me to pause and reconsider everything. She explained that her proposal wasn't an act of rebellion or a desire to undermine our relationship, but rather a desperate attempt to overcome her own deep-seated insecurities. She admitted that she often felt inadequate, that she feared she would never be enough for me or for herself. In her own way, her suggestion was a cry for help, a signal that she was struggling to find her footing in a world that seemed to demand perfection. Her words unsettled me. I felt a pang of guilt for having reacted so harshly, for not realizing sooner the depth of her inner turmoil. But the wound was still raw. I was torn between the instinct to protect what we had and the urge to understand the pain behind her proposal. That letter, more than any heated exchange, exposed the fault lines in our relationship. Fault lines that had been growing silently for years. Now, every day feels like a battle between two truths. On one side is the unwavering belief that our love is sacred, something that should not be compromised by experiments or temporary fixes. On the other side is the undeniable reality that both of us are flawed, wrestling with our own demons in ways we never fully admitted to each other. Her proposal was a catalyst, a moment that forced us to confront the imperfections of our bond. I find myself caught in a crossroads, unsure of which path will lead to healing. Part of me clings desperately to the idea of a relationship that remains untarnished by external influences, a love that is steadfast, even in the face of doubt. Yet another part of me wonders if there's room for growth in the messiness of our imperfections. Could this painful moment be the turning point that forces us to reevaluate not just our relationship, but ourselves? I don't have all the answers right now. The shock of that night lingers like a bruise on my heart, a reminder that even the strongest bonds can be tested in unexpected ways. What I do know is that love, in all its complicated glory, demands that we face our deepest fears, even when those fears threaten to tear everything apart. As I stand on the brink of an uncertain future, I can only hope that the pain we feel now will eventually lead us to a deeper understanding of each other, and perhaps, in time, to forgiveness and healing. For the moment, the silence between us is heavy with unspoken questions and tentative hopes. Whether we can mend what was broken remains to be seen. All I can do is wait and listen, truly listen, to the truth in her words, and perhaps find a way back to the connection we once took for granted. 2 weeks after that agonizing conversation, I found myself drowning in a mix of restless nights and endless what-ifs. I'd barely begun to reconcile the raw hurt from Dory's proposal when a new piece of evidence landed like a sledgehammer to my heart. A luxury hotel reservation in her name. I was scrolling through my emails, trying to distract myself from the lingering sting of our argument, when the notification flashed on my screen. The booking wasn't just any reservation. It was for one of the finest hotels in town, a place Dory would never have mentioned casually if she had been honest with me. I remember the moment vividly, my hands trembling as I double-checked the details, each word in the confirmation email etching itself into my memory. The reservation was scheduled for that very weekend, and it left no room for doubt. In that instant, every uncertain thought I'd had was drowned out by a brutal clarity. I had been deceived again, and this time the betrayal stung with a ferocity I hadn't anticipated. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I reached out to Tom, a longtime friend whose steady presence had seen me through many of life's dark turns. Tom, who was always the pragmatic one, agreed to help me get to the bottom of this. Together, we decided to follow her discreetly. It felt surreal, as if I were playing the role of a detective in a story that I'd never wanted to be part of. We parked our car a safe distance away, hearts pounding in unison, our eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. I watched from the shadows as she stepped into a sleek, black cab and drove off. Every inch of that moment confirmed what I feared most. It wasn't a miscommunication, a fluke, or some misguided attempt at reconciliation. It was a deliberate, cold betrayal. As we trailed her to the hotel, each step of the journey felt like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation that I both dreaded and knew had to happen. That night, I found myself standing outside her hotel room, the neon lights of the building reflecting off my tear-streaked face. I dialed her number with a resolve I wasn't sure I possessed. When she answered, there was a brief moment of silence. A silence that screamed louder than any argument ever had. Then, in a voice that was steadier than I felt, I said, "Dory, it's over. I know everything." I don't remember her response, only the hollow sound of my own words echoing off the walls of that luxury suite. I hung up with the finality of a judge's gavel, each ring marking the end of what I thought we once had. In that moment, I made a choice that would alter the course of my life. I couldn't bear to stay in a place where every corner whispered memories of trust and love now tarnished by betrayal. Without a second thought, I packed a few essentials and left town, cutting off all contact with Dory, with her explanations, with every thread that still held us together. I needed distance, a chance to escape the painful familiarity of our shared past. My journey led me to Mexico, a land of vibrant colors, sun-soaked beaches, and a stark contrast to the cold finality I'd felt in that hotel room. For a time, I tried to lose myself in the anonymity of a new place, wandering through bustling markets and quiet desert roads alike, searching for solace in the simple rhythms of life far from the chaos of betrayal. Yet, even under the brilliant Mexican sun, I couldn't shake the haunting images of that night. The dark hotel corridor, the bitter tone of my own voice, the emptiness that followed each thought of her smile. Just when I began to think that the physical distance might help me heal, the world took an unexpected turn. The pandemic hit, abruptly transforming lives and trapping us all in a state of uncertainty. With international travel grounded and cities turning into silent fortresses, I found myself returning to Singapore, the very place I'd once called home and where I'd spent 4.5 years building a life filled with ambition and promise. Now, however, Singapore felt like a foreign land, its familiar streets masking the ever-present undercurrent of fear and isolation that the pandemic had imposed. Back in Singapore, as the world around me slowed to a standstill, I was left alone with my thoughts. The betrayal, the hotel reservation, the desperate flight into the unknown. It all swirled in my mind like a storm that refused to subside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flash of that confirmation email, the cold determination in Tom's eyes as we followed her, and the sound of my own voice declaring the end of us. It was a haunting reminder that trust, once broken, leaves scars that no amount of distance or time can fully heal. In those long, solitary nights, I began to question everything I'd once believed about love and loyalty. Was the foundation of our relationship so fragile that it could be shattered by a single act of deceit? And if so, what did that say about me, about the choices I'd made, about the vulnerability that allowed me to fall so deeply in the first place? I oscillated between anger and sorrow, each emotion tugging at the edges of my carefully constructed resolve. Some days, I would catch myself wondering if there was more to the story, if perhaps there was an explanation I hadn't yet heard, a truth that could somehow make sense of the chaos. But every time I searched for that elusive clarity, I was met only with the unyielding reality of betrayal. Dory had chosen a path that left no room for misunderstanding, and as much as it pained me to admit it, I had to accept that the woman I had once loved was no longer the person I thought I knew. Now, stranded in a city once filled with hope and endless possibilities, I am forced to confront a future that is as uncertain as it is unwelcome. The pandemic has isolated us all, but for me, it has become a metaphor for the isolation within my own heart. A heart that once beat with the promise of forever, now echoing with the loss of trust and the ghost of a love that had its final, irrevocable moment in that luxury hotel room. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I made the right choice that night. Was it too harsh, too final? Or was it the only way to reclaim a part of myself that I feared was forever lost in the shadows of deceit? I don't have the answers. All I know is that some wounds run too deep to be mended by time alone, and some betrayals are too profound to be erased by distance. All that remains is the bitter taste of regret mixed with the faint hope that someday, somehow, I might learn to trust again, even if it's only the fragile trust in myself. The phone call came on an ordinary Tuesday, shattering the fragile balance I'd been trying to maintain. One minute I was juggling the excitement of a newfound career milestone in Singapore, and the next I was thrust back into the gravity of home. My father had suffered a heart attack. The shock of the news, mingled with worry and regret, forced me to cut short my life in the city that had become a second home. There was no debate. I had to return to be by his side. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. Just days before, I'd received the kind of news that most people only dream about. A massive raise that doubled my salary. It was a professional validation, a testament to all the late nights and relentless effort I'd poured into my work. While my colleagues celebrated the windfall and the promise of a bright future, I sat in the hospital waiting room, feeling the bitter chill of life's unpredictable turns. It was like my world had split into two disparate realms, one of soaring success and the other of personal crisis. Back home, every moment was a jarring reminder of the fragile nature of life. I spent long, sleepless nights at the hospital, watching over my father as he fought to regain his strength. His vulnerability echoed my own internal disarray. Here I was, finally reaping the rewards of years of hard work. Yet the victory was tainted by the fear that tomorrow might bring more loss. Amidst the sterile hospital corridors, I began to question everything, about ambition, about sacrifice, and most of all, about the choices that had led me to this very moment. Throughout this tumultuous period, my old friend Tom was a constant beacon of pragmatism. Even as I grappled with the stark contrasts between my booming career and my family's crisis, Tom's advice cut through the fog of my emotions. Over countless cups of bitter coffee in a corner diner near the hospital, he leaned in and said, "Frank, you've got to close this chapter once and for all. Meeting Dory isn't about reopening old wounds. It's about putting them to rest. You deserve a clean slate." I knew he was right, even as the thought of confronting Dory sent a jolt of anxiety through me. My heart was still raw from the betrayal, the memory of that luxury hotel reservation, the chase with Tom to uncover her deceit, the cold finality of that phone call where I ended everything. Dory had been such a central part of my life, from the innocent days of childhood friendship to the passionate intensity of our romance. And yet, her actions had left a scar I couldn't ignore. Now, as I sat at my father's bedside and faced the uncertainty of each passing day, Tom's words echoed in my mind, urging me to finally face the ghost of my past. It was a strange collision of life's extremes. My career had taken off with a force that was almost surreal, emails filled with congratulatory messages, a salary that allowed me to dream bigger than I ever had before. And yet, at home, every beep of the heart monitor, every whispered update from a nurse, served as a reminder of life's brutal unpredictability. I couldn't help but see the duality of my existence. Success on one hand, and heartbreak and fragility on the other. As I navigated the responsibilities of caring for my father and supporting my family through this crisis, the idea of meeting Dory began to take on a different hue. It wasn't just about confronting a painful betrayal. It was about reclaiming my narrative. I had been living in the shadow of unresolved anger and regret for far too long, and if I ever wanted to move forward, I knew I had to face the person who had once been so integral to my story, even if that chapter had ended in hurt. I spent many restless nights pondering Tom's advice. I'd replayed every moment of my past with Dory, trying to piece together where things had gone so horribly wrong. The memory of that fateful confrontation still haunted me. Her tentative, insecure proposal that I had refused with all the anger and finality of a man who felt utterly betrayed. I had left town, cut off all contact, and embarked on a journey that took me from Mexico to the confinement of a pandemic-stricken Singapore. And now, here I was, back in my hometown, facing not only the tangible threat of a family crisis, but also the intangible burden of unresolved love. In the midst of my father's recovery, a slow, painful process that demanded every ounce of my strength, I began to see the meeting with Dory as a necessary step toward healing. It wasn't an easy decision. The idea of reopening that old wound terrified me. Yet, I also recognized that my life could no longer be defined by the past. The big raise and the doubling of my salary were symbols of my ability to overcome adversity, to rise even when life seemed intent on keeping me down. If I could channel that same determination into confronting Dory, maybe I could finally let go of the bitterness that had seeped into every corner of my heart. Tom and I made plans for the meeting during one of our long, late-night conversations. He reassured me that closure wasn't about blaming or forgetting. It was about understanding, accepting, and then moving on. "You owe it to yourself, Frank," he insisted. "Face her, ask your questions, tell her how you feel, and then, no matter what happens, it's time to let go." So, with a heavy heart and a steeled resolve, I began to prepare myself for the encounter. I rehearsed conversations in my head, tried to anticipate the flood of emotions that might arise, and even wrote down what I wanted to say. The process was cathartic in its own way, a way to structure the chaos of my thoughts into something that could, perhaps, lead to redemption or at least a peaceful closure. Every day brought new challenges. The hospital became a second home, my father's slow recovery a constant reminder of the fragility of life. At work, I was inundated with responsibilities that now carried a weight far beyond the mere digits in my bank account. I found myself questioning if the cost of success was worth the personal toll it exacted. And yet, amidst it all, I clung to the hope that by closing the chapter with Dory, I could finally forge a path forward that was unburdened by past mistakes. The meeting with Dory loomed over me like a storm cloud, uncertain, fraught with potential pain, but ultimately necessary. It wasn't just about ending a toxic chapter. It was about reclaiming my identity and, in a way, honoring the man I was becoming. With Tom's unwavering support, I took the first tentative steps toward arranging that meeting. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I wasn't entirely sure what I expected to gain from it. But the idea of living in perpetual limbo, haunted by a betrayal that had long since run its course, was no longer an option. In a world where my father's health had been the stark reminder of life's unpredictability, and my own career had soared to heights I'd never imagined, the decision to meet Dory was about rebalancing everything. It was about understanding that success and personal pain often exist side by side, and that sometimes the only way to truly move forward is to confront the demons of your past. And so, as I navigated this complicated dance between duty, ambition, and unresolved love, I realized that the meeting wasn't just an act of closure. It was a necessary reckoning, a final step toward reclaiming my own destiny. I agreed to meet Dory in a quiet, nearly forgotten cafe that still held memories of our youth, a place that had once echoed with our laughter and wild dreams. The air that day felt heavy with unspoken words and the ghosts of what we used to be. When Dory arrived, she looked composed, almost serene, but as I studied her face, I could sense an underlying calm that belied the storm we'd once weathered together. I was confused. Part of me still clung to the memories of our closeness, while another part recoiled from the betrayal that had shattered so many of my hopes. We sat down at a small table by a window, the sunlight dim and hesitant as if it, too, wasn't sure it belonged there anymore. After a few moments of strained silence, Dory spoke first. "Frank," she began softly, "I know I hurt you in ways that I can't even begin to imagine. I'm sorry, truly, deeply sorry, for all I put you through. I made mistakes, and I accept the consequences." Her voice was laden with regret, and for a fleeting second, I almost believed that time might mend what had been broken. But I couldn't let her apology be mistaken for a promise of a new beginning. "Dory, forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to what we were," I said, trying to keep my tone even despite the tumult inside. "I've been through so much, and while I might forgive you in my heart, that doesn't mean I'm willing to rebuild our past from its shattered pieces." I paused, collecting the raw emotions that surged within me. "Remember when we were kids? I once ran to protect you when that stray dog lunged at you in the park. I put myself in harm's way just to keep you safe. That was love in its purest form. But now, I feel like you stabbed me in the back when I least expected it." My words hung in the air, and I watched as her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. The pain in them was unmistakable, a mirror of my own. For a long time, we simply sat there, each lost in our own memories of innocence and betrayal. The cafe's background murmur of conversation and clinking cups faded into insignificance compared to the significance of this moment. After a heavy silence, Dory reached into her purse and pulled out a small, delicate box. With trembling hands, she opened it to reveal my engagement ring. A ring that had once symbolized a promise of forever, a promise I had once believed was unbreakable. She slid it across the table to me. "I'm returning this," she whispered. "I can't carry it knowing it represents something we can't be anymore." It was a final act, a symbolic closing of a chapter that had been both beautiful and devastating. I held the ring for what felt like an eternity, its cool metal a stark reminder of all we'd lost. In that silent exchange, we both understood that while our lives would always be intertwined by family, shared history, and the echo of our childhoods, the romantic bond was irreparably severed. There was no anger left in my voice when I said, "Thank you, Dory, but understand, this isn't about forgetting or erasing the past. It's about accepting it, and knowing that forgiveness doesn't mean a second chance at something that has already ended. That final meeting was filled with as much sadness as relief. A bittersweet conclusion to a long, convoluted saga of love, betrayal, and the struggle for personal growth. We agreed to remain friends, bound together by family ties and a history that was too rich to completely discard. As we left the cafe, our paths diverged quietly, with neither of us looking back. I knew I would carry the memories of our childhood, the protective instincts of my younger self, and the deep lessons of betrayal for the rest of my life. Walking away that day, I felt an unexpected lightness, a liberation from the weight of expectations and the illusion of a love that could be rekindled. Instead, I embraced a new reality, one where forgiveness was a personal triumph, not an invitation to repeat old mistakes. In that moment, the ring's absence on my finger wasn't a loss, but rather a symbol of the new, unburdened path ahead. I had closed one chapter of my life, accepting that some scars remain not as wounds but as badges of the strength it took to move on. Sitting alone in the quiet of my small apartment one evening, I finally felt the weight of everything begin to lift. I had spent months grappling with the remnants of our past, Dory's betrayal, the painful final meeting, and the echoes of memories that once made me feel whole. But now, I was beginning to understand that holding on was nothing more than punishment I was inflicting on myself. I realized that I needed to move on, to build a future free from the constant reminder of what had been lost. The journey to this acceptance wasn't swift or painless. I found myself haunted by fleeting moments of regret, flashbacks of shared laughter, of promises made in youth, of the time I risked everything to protect her, only to be stabbed in the back. Those memories stung, and there were nights when the silence of my room was too loud with the whispers of what could have been. But I also recognized that if I clung to the past, I would forever be chained to a chapter that had already closed. Gradually, I began to reframe my narrative. I started small, rediscovering hobbies that once brought me joy, reconnecting with old friends, and even venturing out on spontaneous weekend trips that led me to unexpected adventures. Each step, however minor, felt like a rebellion against the pain I had once allowed to define me. I began to see that my worth wasn't tethered to the choices of someone else. It was mine to define, to cultivate, and to celebrate. I've come to understand that forgiving Dory wasn't the same as letting go of my own future. Forgiveness, I learned, is a gift you give yourself, a way to acknowledge the hurt and then set it aside so you can move forward. It wasn't about erasing the past or pretending that everything was okay. It was about reclaiming my power and deciding that my life was too precious to be lived in the shadow of someone else's mistakes. The process of moving on also meant accepting that some relationships are not meant to last forever in the way we once hoped. The decision to remain friends wasn't a sign of lingering attachment, but rather a recognition of the shared history and family ties that would always bind us, regardless of the role we played in each other's lives. I realized that clinging to the fantasy of what might have been only served to hold me back from embracing the endless possibilities that lay ahead. Looking back now, I see that every betrayal, every painful goodbye, was a stepping stone on the path to self-discovery. I have learned that it's okay to let go of people who no longer serve your growth, even when the memories are wrapped up in the nostalgia of youth and shared dreams. I refuse to punish myself by allowing the echoes of past hurt to dictate the pace of my life any longer. Instead, I'm choosing to focus on building a future that's full of promise, where every day is an opportunity to redefine who I am and what I want from life. I still feel the occasional pang of loss when I remember what we once had, but those feelings no longer hold me captive. They have become bittersweet reminders that I once loved deeply, and that through love, even in its most painful forms, I have grown stronger. Today, I embrace the uncertainty of the future with a quiet determination. I am forging my own path, unburdened by the mistakes and missteps of the past. In this new chapter of my life, I am learning to celebrate every small victory. A smile in the mirror that feels genuine, a spontaneous road trip that fills my soul with wonder, the steady rhythm of a life lived with intention. Moving on isn't about erasing the past. It's about honoring it and then choosing to step forward, knowing that I deserve a future defined by my own resilience and hope. I have finally decided that my future will be mine alone, a future where I no longer allow the choices of others to determine the course of my happiness.